everybody, how's it going? I'm Matt with Middle Tennessee Geek. How is everybody today? Sorry to it.
Here we are.
And you know the guy on the left, John Wesley Shipp. Our first true icon in superhero television. He first suited up as Barry Allen in the original 1990 Flash series. And decades later, he returned to the Speed Force as Jay Garrick and more in the CW's Mega-Diverse Flash. So, he is a fan favorite, an Emmy winner. Did y'all know that? And the heart of the Flash across generations. Please welcome John Wesley Shipp. Louder, come on, louder. There we go. And y'all should know who this guy is. He's the reason we have a Speed Force. We got most influential writer in comic book history. Yes, I stay by that statement. From redefining the Flash and Daredevil to creating the legendary Kingdom Come, his storytelling has shaped the heroes we love. A master of myth and momentum. Please welcome Mark Waid. Sit down, Mark.
For me, so
No, please stop.
respect where respect is due.
Please. You were too kind.
So, how's the con been? I just got here. I got here about 1, waiting on my buddies over there, and just walked in. How's the con been?
It's been terrific. People are friendly. It has been sweet. You know, people are just into fandom. They're into comics. They're into wrestling. They're into TV. They're into the conventions. Is a place where you get to find your tribe, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
That's how I feel. I think it's such an important social event. You know, I mean, we can be pretty divided these days, but in here, we check our egos, our politics, our religion, everything at the door, and we get to come in here and we get to bond person to person around our love of this pop cultural art form.
very well said.
Very good to see you guys.
And we got CMA Fest going on this weekend in Nashville, I believe. Am I saying that? CMA Fest? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a big country follower, but I've seen the news. So very busy weekend for Nashville. So thank you guys both for coming down, hanging out with us. Let's just jump in here. You both left undeniable mark on the Flash. What does the character mean to each of you personally?
Go for it.
Well, for me, it was personally, from a business standpoint, I'd had a 10-year career when I got to the Flash in 1990, but it was daytime TV, Broadway, off-Broadway. So it was my first jump to prime time, and boy, was it a jump. It was the most expensive show Warner Brothers had done for television up to that point, and we were shooting on the back lot at Warner Brothers, and you know, I had to pinch myself, and I was coming over Borum, and I'd see that water tower, Warner Brothers Pictures, and I knew I had a parking space on that lot. But then we got to work, and we didn't have so much CGI in those days, so we were doing live action practical effects. So we were working all night long, fighting the sun coming up from the 3rd week in August through the 2nd week in May, with 4 days off for Christmas, and that was it. Hardest thing I've ever done, but it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well said. What about you, Mark?
And to me, I always related to the character. You know, you ask people, what would you rather have, invisibility or flight? Well, I don't care. Super speed was my power of choice, my dream power of choice my entire life, because I'm impatient, because I'm the kind of guy that if it takes longer to cook than it does to eat, I'm not interested. So I could really hone in on that. I could really get into the character, because as a writer, I feel like the job is to write it from the inside out.
Yes.
And to think about what having those powers is like, not just when you're in conflict, not just when you're fighting, but what it's like to have those powers on a daily basis. What is your regular day like? And so that, it's such a relatable power, because nobody really knows what it's like to be able to lift a car over your head. Nobody really knows what it's like to feel flying through the air, but everybody knows what it's like to miss the bus by this much, right? Everybody knows what it's like to not have your homework done on Sunday night and wish you could just blow through it. So I think, to me, that's the most relatable superpower.
Yeah, I love that also, because I piggybacked on that, because when they first came to me to audition for The Flash in 1990, I was a little leery, because at that point, on television, superheroes, comic entertainment, had mostly been spoofed, you know what I mean? We didn't really take the characters seriously, and so when April Webster, casting director, called me, she said, just read Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo's hour-and-a-half pilot. And so I read it, and I read that there was this unblessed son, where a cop family where real cops worked the streets. But I was in the crime lab because my mom wouldn't be afraid that one of her men might not come home that night. You know, I was CSI before CSI was cool. That's what I like to say.
Yeah.
But my whole template was, if I could create a character that was relatable enough that the audience, you guys, would come into the suit with me, and then we would be looking at the world from the inside out. And so it was the fact that he didn't want the powers, you know, the fact that he only assumed them to avenge the death of his brother, the fact that it affected his personal life with Iris. I can't believe it was over so quickly, you know, that kind of thing. The fact that there was humor, but it was based in character.
Yes, it wasn't lampooning, it wasn't camp.
It wasn't making fun of it.
It didn't make fun of the character, exactly.
Well said. Now, Mark, you changed the universe we know from The Flash by creating what we know now as the Speed Force.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember back then, 31 years ago, your mindset or thought process of how you just come up with that? Because essentially, we don't know Flash now without the Speed Force.
That's really flattering to hear. I got to tell you, it really just came out of my editor, Brian Gustin, who was my best friend, but also my Flash editor. Every story would start with me calling him up and just saying, I got maybe an idea, and he would have an idea, and it would be just, can you top this? Which was great. And so I was sitting around one day trying to figure out what my next Flash story would be. And again, this gets back to writing from the inside out. I was wondering, what do you see if you run faster than the speed of light? What is that experience like? And then that's when we started cracking into, maybe there is something else out there beyond the speed of light. Maybe there is something that is a power source for the Flashes. And then we named it the Speed Force as a placeholder, because we were so much closer to Star Wars at that time. It just sounded like a knockoff, you know. But we couldn't come up with a better name than Speed Force. And it pleases me as a writer, as a writer of these characters. There's nothing better than being able to do something that becomes part of the iconography, becomes part of the legend that outlasts you. You've left something behind, and so. There is a photograph of me, the first moment that the word Speed Force were spoken on television, and I lit up like a Christmas tree. And it just feels good.
When we were doing the story about Savitar, there's a scene where I'm explaining to Grant Gustin's Barry as Jay Garrick, you know, the Savitar. And there was a whole bunch of people on set that day. The head of the CW, Greg Berlanti, was on the other side. I couldn't see him, but he was on the other side of the flat. And the line was, well, he's a legend. And so I asked the director, can I say it's a Speed Force legend?
Good man.
And without hesitating, I heard Greg Berlanti's voice saying, yes!
That's great. I was very lucky to have Savitar, some other stuff that I created in that show, and it's just been, I'm very lucky, blessed that way.
Well said. Now, John, your 90s series did not incorporate the Speed Force because it didn't exist yet until 94?
94.
94? Yeah. What was it like when you went back to do the CW series? Now, it's a character in itself, especially towards the last few seasons. Was there anything for you as the actor who played this originally that you had to change a mindset, or just anything you can think of in general that you have this character of a Speed Force now part of this Flash universe that didn't exist when you did the 90s for the series?
Well, first of all, when I went in, I was glad I went in not as a speedster, but as a completely new version of Henry Allen. My dad, Emmett Walsh, was not wrongfully convicted of killing my mother in front of a 10-year-old me.
Right.
That was not my origin story. So when they came to me with this darker version, I was thrilled to play it. And then they pulled the bait and switch, and I became Jay Garrick. And that was one of the first things I had to learn about, because my very first entrance you see Barry changing the timeline. He's running through the Speed Force, and you see my hand come in and grab him and snatch him out of the Speed Force, and he goes tumbling up against a car tire. And I'm like, okay, so who is this kid? I went from Henry Allen, who loved him, was the soft shoulder for him to lay his head on, to being Jay Garrick, which was, okay, who are you? What are you doing in my Speed Force? Are you going to change the timeline every time you have a fight with your girlfriend? Yeah, I look like your dead dad. Sorry about that. But here's the deal. What kind of hero are you going to be? So I had to get to know the Speed Force as a character, almost like plasma, almost like running through everything that we did. And then it also gave Michelle Harrison the opportunity to play an incarnation of the Speed Force.
Yes.
Very well said. All right, just kind of open question for both of you. When you first get involved with the world of superheroes, Mark, your comics, John, you're on screen, you ever imagine what it became today?
No. I mean, look, I was still reading comics back when you were afraid to show people you were reading
Hello.
comics. that if you were an adult reading comics in Hollywood, that was the shortcut for, oh, he's a special needs child. Right? Yeah. So the fact that what happened was Dark Knight and Watchmen and Mouse, all that stuff hit in the mid-'80s. And what happened is every fan who read that stuff, a lot of those guys went on to become Hollywood producers. So they were the first wave in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s were like, I take comics seriously. And so we now live in a world where the geeks won. The nerds won. We won. Like everybody is wearing, my grandmother's wearing an Iron Man t-shirt. I mean, what world am I living in? But it's been, I never would have anticipated that.
I mean, look at this convention. I mean, this is the world we never thought we would have.
No.
15,
you know
20
what a
years
convention
ago.
was? You whippersnappers, you know what a convention was? When I was your age, a convention was a room full of people selling comics, and a room, like a hotel ballroom of people selling. That's what a convention is. Now look at what we got.
Dude, when I was first doing The Flash in 1990, they said, you know, on Saturday there's this little convention going on in San Diego. We should probably stop by and walk through and say hi, you know, to the writers and take some pictures. I signed maybe half a dozen autographs. We were there for an hour, and we walked through and went back to LA. Okay, flash forward to 2014. 180,000 people have taken over the town, San Diego. Jesse Martin and I, he wants to step out and have a smoke, and we stepped out on a balcony, and it was a sea of people, and this tremendous cheer went up. And Jesse was like, we haven't even done anything yet, you know. So putting on a superhero suit in 1990 was a little bit like diving into an ice pond. You know, you weren't quite sure what the reaction was going to be. By 2014, you guys were ready for us.
Yeah.
We had 7,000 people in Hall H for our pilot premiere at San Diego Comic Con, with people who had slept outside, you know, to get a ticket to get in. And I always say to you guys who were back there in the day, aren't you proud of yourselves? The rest of the industry has finally caught up with you.
Yes, well put, well put.
7,000 people, wow.
Give yourselves a hand.
I mean, we got standing people here. I mean, come on, we're filling this place up too. You know? With so many versions of the Flash across media, what do you think keeps audiences connected to the character? It's a question for both of you.
Take that one. That's me. I honestly, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. It is a very relatable superpower. It is something that we all wish that we could kick into every once in a while, because we all want to make more out of our day. We all feel like at the end of the day, like we've only had more time. We just had more time with our kids. If we just had more time to relax, if we just had more time to watch football, whatever. Everybody wants that. I think that's what makes them relatable.
Exactly.
It was amazing. When I went to Paris to do a little movie with Mark Harmon and this Italian actress, I was walking in the 90s along the street, along the banks of the Seine. I was jogging, and there were these young French men, you know, young boys, going whoosh and running up and down beside me on the set, and it was mind blowing. But repeat your question, because I had a thought. What was your question?
What do you think keeps audiences connected to the character?
I've asked people, and people say, because he's an ordinary guy, he's not a badass particularly, he's not a vigilante, he's an ordinary guy with a unique ability, with an extraordinary ability that he didn't necessarily ask for, in my version, that he didn't want, and yet he has to come to grips with it. And each and everybody in here has something that if you weren't here, it wouldn't be in the world. Right. That you were put here to bring whatever it is that is your quality, your vein of gold, I had a teacher put it, to bring into the world. And how do you cope with that? So people can relate to Barry Allen. I said to Grant Gustin at one point, he was stumbling around, I said, you know, God bless Barry. His head is always, his heart is always in the right place. His head is just trying to catch up.
Yeah, and he's always blaming himself.
Yeah.
Especially like Grant's version.
But you don't have to be, you're right, you don't have to be an alien from another planet. You don't have to be a billionaire. You know, you just, a guy who just, a random guy who gets super speed. You know?
He's a scientist in most versions.
Yeah.
And he truly wants to do the next best thing.
Yeah.
What is the next best thing? And invariably, you know, he's spinning all these plates, and this one will come crashing to the ground, and he picks it up and starts spinning it again. But he's very relatable in that way, in that he is really genuinely a good guy. And the fact that you guys have managed to take a genuinely good guy who wants to do the right thing, who gets these extraordinary powers, and keeps it interesting enough to keep a big audience engaged with that template. I mean, that is hats off to you guys.
I think the trick is, look, yes, Barry had his origin where his father was killed and framed for murder and stuff, but that's not like Batman's origin where he's seeking vengeance every day for the death of his parents. I hate orphan revenge as a motive for heroes. I hate it because it's an easy way. For a writer, it's easy, low-hanging fruit, and it kind of puts the lie to the people who really do good things because it's the right thing to do. It's, you know, every time you think it has to be about orphan revenge, it's like that. Well, that slams the paramedics. What about the firefighters? What about the cops that are out there doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do? That's heroism. It is easy to be, oh, I gotta revenge my parents for the. No, a lot of people do good just for the sake of doing good. And those are the people I think that need to be celebrated.
Very
well,
well
I have an answer for the next Q&A I do next month.
There you go.
I'm saying, well, Mark Waid said.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're recording it, John, so
I'll
we
write
can
that
give you
down
a
for you.
Now, Mark, as a writer, how do you balance staying true to a character's history with reinventing them for a modern audience?
It's tricky. How do I balance the history versus reinventing for the modern audience? The history is all up here, right? Like I can tell you Superman's family tree. I can't tell you my senator's name, but I can only name 38 states. But I can tell you all this stuff. So it's all up here. So I don't have to worry about research. That's the good news. But everything you do to keep it relatable and contemporary is about looking at the world around you and seeing what's happening and finding ways to have your characters reflect that. Like, an example is you don't want to get into like deep politics with a superhero, but there's still allegory that you can use with. I think superheroes are best served not dealing with real world problems, but dealing with allegories for real world problems. So you got to pay attention to that. You got to be aware of what's going on in the world, and you can't just write comics about comic books. That's the trick.
It would get boring.
Yeah, exactly, and repetitive. And then it becomes a nostalgia act. And the last thing in the world I want to be is a nostalgia act. My editors have the strict orders to pull the plug on me the day I become a nostalgia act.
And that is so hard to do, because I've done series, not Flash related, but series that have gone several seasons. And the easy way, the hard way is to keep your core actors active and interesting. The easy way is to just, well, let's just bring in a bunch of new characters and write stories for them. But to take these characters that have been, you know, what, 50, 75 years old, I mean, you know, and keep them continuous and interesting and active, I mean, that's art, you know, and that's what I respect.
It is something that, I mean, this is the God's honest truth. I've done the research. There have been more stories told about Batman than about any other character in human history. This is absolutely true.
Why is that? Easy?
Because we publish 6 Batman books a month. That's why. I give you make money doing it. But also, he's such a versatile character. You can tell mysteries, you can tell science fiction, you can tell, you know, a little bit of humor. You can tell, there's any kind of stories you can tell with Batman. So, but you're going to remember in 1938, 1939, 1940, when these characters were being created, no one ever imagined that this stuff would last 75, 80 years, that it would become like this ongoing narrative, like the DC Universe is this one big giant novel that just keeps going. No one could have predicted that, but it's turned out pretty well.
Exactly. All right, and I'm going to just finish one more last question, and we'll take our last few minutes to turn it over to you guys. John, is there... I'm not yelling at you.
Am I too close to the mic?
No, about right here is what I've always been told.
Yes, what would you like?
This is God. Is there a performance or scene that you're most proud of in your career that fans may not bring up often?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's so hard.
That's why I asked.
I've been an actor for 47 years.
I'm only 39.
And, you know, I could go back to each medium. Daytime, I have 2 Emmys for daytime for 2 different shows. Psychopaths. And then, you know, I get to play a hero on The Flash. The last scene of that series, talking to my nephew Sean. I couldn't run as fast as your dad, but if you ever need me, I'll be there. I'll be there in a flash, you know, that. The Teen Wolf Dad, which is the sickest character, I never, you know, it's like I watch that and I go, okay, let's put, wherever that came from, let's put that back in the box. Put a lid on it. But I will say this, so, the father-son scenes in the beginning, particularly first season of the CW Flash, are some of the most meaningful scenes I've ever done. Because Grant Gustin is such a truthful, honest, no artifice actor. And we had our backstory practically written for us. He knew I was the Flash. I knew he was taking on an iconic role. I knew what some of his fears, hopes, and dreams might be, insecurities. I'm playing his father. My role is to hold a mirror up to him to show him all the great things that I see in him that I know will make him a great Flash for today. So pretty much we cued into each other. People said, how did you work up all that emotion? And I said, the problem wasn't working up the emotion. The scenes were beautifully written. And it's a loaded relationship, the father-son relationship, right? The problem was not letting the emotion run away with us. Because we could have been out there having a great old time and cathartic experience. The audience is out there left going, okay, where do we come in? You know. But they were some of the most meaningful. It's like when Henry is in the infirmary. He's already figured out that his son's the Flash. But he hasn't told Barry that he knows. But he's reading the newspaper about how the Flash saved this guy. The Flash saved Joe West. I guess Joe was lucky. He was there in time for me, too. I guess I was lucky. You know, lucky me. Barry hears what I'm saying. And he says, Dad, if I was the Flash, don't you think I would have told you? And I love what Henry does here. He doesn't pull his covers. You know, he doesn't out him as the Flash. He says, yeah, but I'll say one thing. If my son were the Flash, I'd want him to know it's a dangerous world. He's saving a lot of lives. And most of all, that his father's proud of him. And that's not only great writing, you know, that's good parenting. He waited for Barry to come to him and go, gee, Dad, it's me. You know, at which point I said, well, you always did look good in red.
Yeah. All right, before we go to the audience, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
So talk to me about the day they brought you into the CW universe by this time. You've been Jay, you've been wearing the hat and a shirt, fairly easy. Talk to me about the time they came to you and said, okay, now we want to put you back in the big velour suit.
Man. I was in New York in the summer, and they said, we're bringing a team to scan you for a new suit. And I thought, oh cool, Jay Garrick's getting a new suit. Great, I wonder what it looks like. And then I saw the sketches, and I'm like, wait a minute. What are we talking about here?
That thing could not have been comfortable.
No, it wasn't. But they built a new version that was more comfortable.
Technology has caught up with it. Okay, good.
But I said to Andrew Chrysler, I said, you know that was 28 years ago. Do any of you want to do a 28-year challenge? You know?
Yeah.
I don't think so. He said, you'll be fine. But we worked with Kate Main and Ocean Drive Leather in Vancouver, and we came up with a new version, slightly reduced, of the old suit. We didn't have to glue it. I didn't have to wear a vest like race car drivers wear to circulate ice water through the vest in between takes to wake me up and snap me to because the temperature was so hot. I didn't have to step up on a lean board and lean back because I couldn't sit down in the suit, you know. They brought out the old Betty Davis lean board with the old costume epics when the women would have ball gowns, they couldn't sit down. I'm like, man, don't let that get out. I'll be, you know, that's the end. But no, I thought they were nuts. And they said, and I said, I want to make sure of one thing. We're not pretending it was 28 years ago, right? These 28 years have gone by. They said, oh yes. And the second thing I wanted to make sure of is I wasn't going to be in like one scene as a stunt, and they said, no, we have too much respect for the character, you're going to be a vital part of trying to work it, and you're going to make a heroic sacrifice. So actually, 28 years later, I got an ending to my Flash, which was interrupted in 1991, and I couldn't feel more honored that they wanted to do that and that we did that.
Now, I did bring up one more thought. Because we have so many Star Wars fans here, we got a whole slew of Star Wars guests back here for the animated series. You got to talk about Mark Hamill a little bit. I mean, he's my Joker from Batman. He's your trickster. He's Luke Skywalker to so many. I mean, you got a fun memory about him?
Well, Mark is the greatest guy and has remained a friend through the different incarnations. I remember we were riding back from the set of the CW Flash after doing the scene where I'm catching the bullets in the helmet, and I say, sorry, you're out of bullets. And he goes, yeah, but I'm not out of bombs. And he opens his and we're riding back, and he said to me very thoughtfully, he said, you know, John, rarely do actors get to come back to a role a quarter of a century later and contribute in a meaningful way to its ongoing. He had just come from the set of Star Wars, and he was doing it again with The Flash. But one thing I have to say, I was scared of that suit at the beginning. I shouldn't tell it myself because you'll see it if you go watch the Blu-ray of the original show. I'm like, don't give me any lines in the suit. I don't want to move too much. You know, I don't want to be a mascot. In other words, I didn't want to have the cowl back, eating a ham sandwich and drinking a Diet Coke, you know, in the suit. But, so I was very stiff at the beginning. Well, here comes Mark, you know, as the trickster. No holes barred, you know, full out. Man, we were all going, wow, we couldn't believe this character that he was coming up with. And I thought, you know, John, if Mark Hamill can commit to this extent, then you need to get over your bad self. And he really helped me. But he continues to this day. He has one of the wings. Last shot, sun's coming up. I ripped the wings off and threw them in the air and swore I'd never get into another superhero suit as long as I never say never. Well, Mark almost lost his mind. He's crawling around garbage cans and under cables. Don't let him get away. And so he has one of the wings, and Danny Bilson has the other.
Oh, that's cool. All right, goals. All right, again, all right.
Now, if you want to know that whole story, he told it at Chattanooga Comic Con, and I recorded it. Go to Middle Tennessee Geek on YouTube. You can see it. Find that Comic Con. It's that
cool.
panel. All right, guys, I'm going to let, what we got? How much time we got?
If anybody wants to do questions, There's a tape here, blind. We get here. And
So one of my favorite things, both about like the way that you act and the way that you write, is the way that you do relationships. Like the different dynamics that are present within the characters. I find those so fascinating, and that's what keeps the stories relevant to me, and that's what keeps me coming back. So what are some of your favorite dynamics to write or to play with?
You go.
Well, I got into big trouble at the big press event kicking off the new shows in 1990, because unbeknownst to me, the buzzword that year was relationships. It's all about relationships. But to me, the thing that interested me in Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo's script was the dynamic, the father-son, the unblessed son, where real cops work the streets, who gets a power to avenge his brother's death, but can't tell him what it is. His dad would be so proud. So I said, well, for me, my naive self, it's about relationships. And suddenly, everyone goes, oh! And I'm like, what did I say? What did I say? And then Paul DeMeo left me hanging, because there was a show called 30-something at that time that was all about relationships.
Problems, people who have no problems.
And so he turned to the audience and said, well, it's not Flash something. I said, thanks a lot, Paul.
Yeah.
But I stuck to my guns. It was about relationships. And in the news show, women would come up to me and say, I had no interest in comic books. I watched the first episode of the CW Flash. I got interested in the people. And that all comes out of the legacy of what we were bequeathed, by these men, by this guy right here,
Hold your applause.
No, don't hold your applause. Well, I would not be here if it weren't for this man.
Too kind.
We may not have the CW series if it weren't for that idea of the Speed Force.
You were too kind. Anyway, let me answer your question. To me, that's all I care about when I'm writing characters, is their relationships. Because that's when you find out who people really are. Because people act differently around other people. You act differently around your dad than you do around your best friends, than you do around your grandmother, right? Everybody has those facets to them, and that's interesting to me. And it tells you who they are, and it gives you a sense of what they care about, what matters to them. And so, on that note, Archie, when I was writing Archie comics, was some of my favorite stuff I ever did. They actually had me to grow up the characters, not make them super serious, but write them like they would be contemporary teenagers today. And it was so much fun because that's all relationships. And so all you have to do for a story in an Archie comic is put Jughead and Veronica in a story together, and then think about, okay, what do they like? What do they dislike? What are their friction points? What do they have in common? And that the story is written for you that way. Of course.
Thank you for your question. All right, we may have time for one more, maybe two, depending on.
There you go. Come on.
There you go.
There you go.
Somebody get a shot there for this young man.
Somebody have a photo op of this man? Okay.
Free photo op. There you go.
All right, John, the first question I have...
Look him in the eye. You're okay. It's fine.
Is how did you approach Jay as opposed to Barry?
I'm glad you asked me that question. That was one of the most interesting things about it, because like I said, me and Grant and I got very close, because what we were playing every day was father-son intimacy. His fears, his hopes and dreams, me trying to reassure him that I've made peace with my life. Stop trying to prove that I didn't kill, you go ahead with your life. Lots of tears spilled in those scenes, okay? And so we had developed this shorthand with each other. At one point, he came in and he was hanging on, and he said, I hug you more than I do my own dad, And then I became Jay Garrick. And then suddenly it's like I said, it's like, okay, who is this kid in my Speed Force? And we're running that first coffee shop scene where I'm explaining the breaking of the coffee cup and how it never goes back the same way. And the whole thing about, I look like your dead dad, sorry about that, but what can I do? And at one point we're running lines and Grant just puts his head down and starts laughing. And I said, man, what are you laughing at? He said, this is just so weird. It's like all of a sudden I'm getting this cold, judgmental energy from you, and it's just, we had to readjust. We really had to readjust. because suddenly I couldn't, if I came out of the Iron Mask as Henry Allen, what would have been, it was written. When I came out of the Iron Mask, everybody's looking at me like I had two heads. And it was written, what's the matter? I said, that's what Henry would say. They said, well, what do you think Jay would say? I came out, I looked around, I went, what? You know, and so set the temperature differently right from the beginning.
The other thing you did well, we'll get to you in a second. The other thing you really did well with Jay, and here's something I don't think you even know, is that Jay Garrick, the Flash, 1940, was the very first superhero who was a specialist. He's the first one to have only one superpower special. Everybody else before that was, I'm lifting cars and I'm flying and I'm running, or I'm doing this, or I'm Wonder Woman and I've got a lasso and this and this. He was the very first superhero who only had one power and really made it work. And again, same with you. You understood what that power meant on a, like I said, on a day-to-day basis. How that makes you a different person. And I always appreciated that.
Mark, thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. You had something to say, Sam?
I was just wondering, how did it feel in Kingdom Come coming together with Alex Ross when, with a single bolt of lightning, Armageddon has arrived?
Yeah.
That panel, like what was in your head when Shazam died?
I wanted that moment. The moment when Superman is an unstoppable force throughout the entire series, and at the end of issue 3, suddenly a little boy says a magic word, and there's Captain Marvel, and he bounces off that guy's chest. I mean, so that, thank you. When I write, I tend to think visually, and I tend to think in images as much as anything. And so I will just have these images in my head, and they're like face-down puzzle pieces, right? And then I'll turn this one over, and oh, this is an interesting image, and here's an interesting image, and as I start to turn them over, I start to see ways to connect them and start to make a story out of them. So, but that was in my head for the longest time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think we have time for one more. He's been waiting. Let's go ahead and get him over here. He'll be our last question. Let's make it a good one.
Okay. Yeah, of course he has a question. Look at him.
Riddle me that.
Riddle me this, John. I stole your line. I'm sorry.
Mine's more of a, I guess, a joke question for you.
All right.
It seems with modern writers, like with Spider-Man can just never be happy. He's just like, he'll go on a stretch where he's like, oh, I'm doing really good, and then like people just tear him down.
Yeah.
And they do that with MJ a lot. Paul, I really hate Paul. Is there a way to, because it kind of gets repetitive and you kind of backtrack on character development, is there a way to make Spider-Man happy, and can we kill off Paul?
Well, I can't speak to Paul, but I will say this. No, you can't make Spider-Man happy, because here's the thing. We all, and I believe this, if we've been reading comics for this character forever, we like the moments where they're happy. But as a general rule, audiences aren't riveted to characters who are happy all the time, because then they have no challenges, they have nothing to overcome, they have there's no friction point in their life. Then there's no story if you're just happy and you've won all the time. That's my first answer. My second answer is, for a good Spider-Man story, and I swear this is true, the way it's balanced is, for Spider-Man to win, Peter Parker has to lose. Or for Peter Parker to win, Spider-Man has to lose. That's the perfect balanced Spider-Man story to me, because there's always that lovable loser aspect to him. So I'm sorry to say, he will never be completely happy. Yeah. Of course.
All right. Thank you, Erica. Thank you for the questions.
That's very funny, because I started in soaps, and one of the greatest head writers, Douglas Farland, who wrote my character on Guiding Light and on As the World Turns, and it was really some of the best writing on television. We were getting 22 million viewers a week. Kevin Bacon was my dressing room maid. Julianne Moore was my leading lady, you know, and they would always come in, the Procter & Gamble people would come in and they'd say, well, the audience really wants this guy to get with this girl, and they want Morgan to be with Kelly, and his response was, If I hear the word focus group one more time,
Yes, yep.
I am walking right out of that door and going, he lived in Connecticut, going back to Connecticut. He said, if we did everything, if every perfect person was with their perfect mate, if all the problems were resolved, which of course the audience wants to see, that's the tension. But if we did all that, we might as well go home.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening in the story.
And if the audience knew what it wanted, it wouldn't be an audience, right? If the famous quote from Henry Ford, and it applies to anything, including entertainment. The famous quote from Henry Ford is, who invented the Model T, obviously, if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said, we want faster horses. Because they couldn't imagine. And that's what you have to bring as an entertainer. You have to show them a possibility they hadn't even considered before. And that's much harder to do if everybody is happy and loving and everything is swell.
Yeah.
I like those moments too. I hate the moments when it's all bad all the time. But you need those.
You gotta earn them.
You gotta earn the victory. Yes.
All right, well, guys, thank you so much. The time has flown by. Our time is out now, so we need to get out of here. We'll get ready for the next panel. Guys, let's give these guys a big round of applause for John Wesley Shipp, Mark Waid. Go visit them at their panels. They're still here for another couple more hours, or their booths. And yeah, thank you all for showing up. Thank you for your great questions. And let's hit one more round of applause for these guys.